Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us for this Head of School Roundtable about the opening of school. As you can see, I am coming to you from a log cabin in western Maine in a little town called Aquasic, where I spend most of my summer. I'm joined today by Dr. Kristin Spencer, Hill's Medical Director, and it's sort of like old times here, Dr. Spencer. We did a bunch of these last summer, and here we are back again. Slightly different position, fortunately. But we're looking forward to providing some information following up on the email that went out recently with our opening of school guidelines, and just wanted to take any questions and try to resolve any concerns as much as we can today. I know that everyone is following the news closely, so we won't belabor some of the things that everyone is aware that is going on. So in any event, I just wanted to start with just an overview of the school year calendar, and nothing has changed on that front. We still have the arrival period that starts on August 23rd with preseason football and other preseason sports. We will have our fall term followed by our H term, then our winter term and our spring term. Right now, we're primarily focused on our fall term with changing conditions, and we hope that as the fall progresses, we'll continue to get back to our normal flow. But I'll get into some more detail about the fall term. As of right now, the H term is still scheduled to be an on-campus experience, unless a student applies to do an off-campus experience. That we are in a position that we could pivot and change if we had to on that front. But again, we're hoping that that's not the case come December 1st. A little bit drilled down on the beginning of the school year and the fall term. We do have this preseason athletics period that begins on August 23rd through September 2nd. Our other students start arriving on the 2nd through the 6th. We'll get into that in more detail. Our fall term, you can see there, includes a fall parents weekend and long holiday weekend from the 15th to the 19th. We have our traditional Thanksgiving recess, and then followed by the H term in December. So again, nothing has changed on that front. We're still on schedule for all of those, that timeline. Hopefully everyone's finishing up their summer reading and getting ready for classes and getting their packing together and that sort of thing. But here are just the upcoming arrival dates. August 23rd is for preseason football invited athletes. They get a little bit of a head start due to some heat requirements. August 26th, all of our other fall preseason invited athletes will come to campus. By now, you will know if you're an invited athlete. So if you have that question mark, you would know by now. September 2nd, a group of invited student leaders are coming to campus to help us prepare for orientation. That is our prefects, the head, the co-presidents of student government, the president and vice president of our honor council, and I believe there are 8 international student leaders or student ambassadors who are invited. Again, you would know by now if you're scheduled to be there on September 2nd. We also begin the theater boot camp, which is for a group of students to come to do sort of an intensive theater program for the first few days, with their performance being on September 4th. All of our third form students will arrive on September 3rd for an extended orientation. That's new this year. So hopefully you have that on the schedule already. Our new 4th, 5th, and 6th form international students arrive on September 4th. And our new 4th, 5th, and 6th form domestic boarding and day students begin orientation on September 5th and arrive on that day. And then all other returning students who aren't back on campus at this point return on September 6th for the first day of our campus-wide orientation, including convocation, and classes begin on September 7th. So it's all going to come at us pretty quickly in these different waves of arrival dates. And so if you need to take a picture of that, you should have all this in your calendar, but if you need to, please go ahead. I want to just give you an overview of what to expect on your different arrival days. This will vary a little bit based on whether you're coming as a preseason athlete, as a new third former, or a returning student. You'll also be receiving an assigned arrival date, a time slot, and also a arrival sequence by email in the coming days. We did this last year to really spread out the arrival time, so not 100 students didn't all arrive at 8 a.m. We have a few more steps in the arrival sequence this year than we've had in previous years, and so we want to make sure it's well paced and that everyone can move through the process appropriately. So you'll get that time. If for some reason that time slot doesn't work for you because of a plane arrival or something like that, you can contact the school and we'll try to rearrange that for you. But please do plan to arrive during your time slot. All arrivals will be through the Cfta parking lot. Most of you know where that is. If not, you can put in the Beach Street address there, 760. When you arrive there, that's where the combination of your student packet pickup will be, as well as our rapid COVID-19 testing inside the Cfta. There'll be an outdoor hospitality area for parents, and there'll be restrooms for parents available. But going inside the Cfta will be just the students. They'll go into the upper level where they'll get their packet. They'll go downstairs and have their COVID-19 test done, which is a 15-minute rapid test. Once that's done, they'll come back to the car and you'll begin the dormitory arrival sequence if you're a boarder, obviously. We are allowing vaccinated family members that are masked to assist with the move-in. We'll also have a lot of prefects there and other student leaders to help, and dorm parents. So you'll be able to drive right up to your dorm or very close to the dorm to do that process. We have put up a large tent at the Wells-Davidson soccer pitch right in the middle of campus. There will be a head of school luncheon and parent information sessions during some period of the day, especially for our new students. That'll all be done outdoors so that we can all be together and unmasked. Masking is optional, I think. We'll see how it goes at that point. And then we'll have advisor meetings, which will be in classroom locations and hopefully some outdoor locations as well. If it's indoors, it will be masked. So obviously parents and family members should bring a mask, as well as students. We'll do continued dorm room setup if applicable, parents and students. And then at some point in the day, we'll ask parents and family members to depart, and we'll continue with students with our orientation activities as we've done in years past. We're looking forward to welcoming a pretty large group of students to Hill this year. Nearly 550 students, our largest enrollment by far ever in the history of the school. So that's exciting. Moving along here. I shared a little bit of information in my recent email to all families, but I wanted to give you a more updated version of our vaccination snapshot. I will tell you, this is still a little bit in flux. We still have families providing documentation. There are a lot of moving parts, especially with our new health medical records, electronic medical record system that we're using this year. So these are, I would say, pretty close to accurate, if not fully accurate numbers, but it changes moment to moment. And so we're doing our best here. Of our 270 full-time and regular part-time employees, 98% of that group is vaccinated, either fully or in progress. We have 1% of our employee group that have received temporary medical exemptions, and 1% of our employee group has received enduring exemptions, which means that they will the exemption will continue beyond any change in the FDA status of the vaccine. As I mentioned before, we're anticipating an opening enrollment of roughly 550 students, different than last year because almost all of those students will arrive on their established arrival date. We have only a small number of students who are delayed due to visa issues internationally. So other than that, we'll actually open with 550 students this year. Right now, 90% of those students are fully vaccinated or in the process of being vaccinated, meaning that they've had one shot, maybe they've had their second shot and are in the waiting period, and will be closer to fully vaccinated by the opening of school. About 5.5% of our students, primarily international students, have been given a 5-week grace period to be vaccinated once they arrive in the United States. This is due to the lack of accessibility to vaccines in their home countries, where they've spent the summer. And it's mostly our new international students, since many of our returning international students were on campus last spring when we held vaccination clinics on campus. We have 3% of our students who've received a temporary FDA exemption. That means that they've been given an exemption until the vaccines are given full approval by the FDA. Right now, they're an emergency use approval. And we are hearing that may happen as early as Labor Day. And then those students have 30 days, hopefully sooner, to receive their full vaccination, and we'll help arrange those vaccinations once students are on campus, whether that's bringing another vaccine clinic to campus or arranging for it at a nearby pharmacy, which is pretty easy for us. And then we only have 1.5% of our students with enduring exemptions. State of Pennsylvania requires certain medical exemptions and sincerely held reasonable religious beliefs, so we've supported those as well. So assuming that those 8.5% of exemptions, the temporary FDA exemptions and the 5-week accessibility exemptions occur in the first month of school, we could be as high as 98, a little higher than 98% fully vaccinated by the beginning of school, which is really quite an accomplishment. And I'm grateful to Dr. Spencer and her team and all of our community who've worked together to make this happen. There's very few environments on the planet where you can be so assured about the vaccination status of those who are closest to you and around you. And that provides us with a great level of protection and reassurance for our students. So thank you to everyone for taking care of that in such a timely way. If you haven't documented your vaccination status and you received an email from me about a week and a half ago, that deadline is tomorrow. And please comply with that because it's getting really close to the time, and it's a lot of moving parts for Dr. Spencer and her team. Here are the things that I shared in the email, and I think rather than showing that whole chart that I sent you, I sort of wanted to summarize it in a way that made it, sort of boiled it down in a way that everyone could understand. The most important thing that you should take away from this is that every student, vaccinated or unvaccinated, must have a negative pre-arrival PCR test, not an antigen test. So make sure when you're getting this test, it is a PCR test, generally speaking, not a rapid test. And that's why we're asking for you to do it 2 to 4 days prior to arrival. If you do it one day or on the same day, you're not going to have the results back and you won't be allowed on campus. So please have it done 2 to 4 days prior, and 5 days is too far in advance. We really want this to be as close to the time as you're coming to campus as feasible, knowing that we'll get the results back on time. If you are traveling, especially internationally, we believe this is required for pretty much all international flights at this point. But if you're arriving on an international flight and getting to the United States more than 4 days before the beginning of school, you need to have another test when you get to campus, get to the United States. So please make arrangements for that. Pretty easy to get these days, and there's a testing center right in Pottstown for those of you who are local that has a lot of availability and is free and can turn it around pretty quickly. You need to upload your pre-arrival PCR test to the website. The link has been provided a few times. You can go back to that original email, it's right there. And please bring a printed copy of your results or a screenshot on your phone of the results, just so that we can verify. If there's an issue with the upload or something like that, this is just a backup for us, so we can verify that. Printed is much better than on your phone, please, if you could do that. I see Dr. Spencer smiling. In addition to the PCR test, we will be doing a rapid COVID-19 test for all students. That is an antigen test. It's a 15-minute test, which we'll do right on site, and we'll get you the results pretty quickly. Obviously, if you have a positive arrival test, we will we'll address that at the time. You won't be allowed to enter campus, and we'll have to make other arrangements. That's why we're doing the pre-arrival PCR test in addition. Again, if you get a positive PCR test in your pre-arrival sequence, please contact us right away. You shouldn't plan to arrive 2 days later or 3 days later. You're going to need to stay at home until you complete the quarantine process or isolation process. For the first 2 weeks of school, 2 weeks of classes, I should say, we are planning on universal indoor masking. This is for all members of our community. They'll be masked indoors, and whether that's in a building, in a vehicle, if they're off campus, in a restaurant, whatever the case might be, we're asking everyone to be masked indoors. That's a CDC recommendation. It's a Montgomery County recommendation. And given our concerns about people coming from 30 countries, 30 states plus, we want to make sure that we're taking every precaution to build our campus health right off the bat, and then hopefully allowing our high level of vaccination do its job. All unvaccinated students will have a quiet period, which means basically some sort of self-regulated distancing. So if they're doing athletics, they won't be in the sort of group drills. There may be some other areas of campus where we're asking them to distance themselves from other students just for 3 days. And we will do a PCR test on day 3, which will, if negative, will obviously release them from the quiet period. But there will be some continued testing of unvaccinated students for the first 2 weeks on a bi-weekly basis. And so we're just taking every precaution to make sure, especially with the Delta variant out there, we want to make sure we know whether there's any Delta variant on campus so that we can really limit that and its impact. For the first few weeks of school, we have decided to do a modified daily schedule with respect to our large gatherings. So instead of having all of our students and faculty at lunch in a seated meal format, and then going to chapel before that, we're going to do half the school at chapel while the other half is in a seated meal, and then switch. So we'll have 2 chapels and 2 lunch periods. And if it's a school meeting day, it'll be the same sort of swapping of half the school. And we'll probably be doing that by advisor group. So it won't be, grades and that sort of thing, our forms, it will be by advisor group. That's something we've done over the last couple of years anyway, is really try to get the advisor groups some bonding time in those first 2 weeks. So we are getting back to our original, some of our important traditions at the school, but we're just taking it a few steps at a time before we have 600 or 700 people in one room. So that's where we are there. There will be some initial limits to campus visits and leaves. First of all, the first 2 weekends of the school year are always closed weekends, so students are not allowed to go home on those weekends. We do that to build community at the school. If you are coming to visit your child, the first 2 weeks, we're gonna keep those visits outdoors, except of course to use the restroom. And beyond that, we are considering some differences for vaccinated family members as well as vaccinated students in terms of how that might play out. So we're just keeping an eye on that. And then the last thing I would say is, and this really isn't written in the document per se as a restriction or a rule, but we are asking everyone to exercise off-campus caution. Certainly, we are requiring, if you're off campus on a school trip, that you be masked when you're indoors. But if you're on a campus leave, or you're at home, or you're a day student, it just behooves all of us and you to please be masked when you're in indoor settings, public spaces where you don't know the vaccination status of the 200 people at the event. Wear a mask. If you are at a crowd, even in an outdoor gathering, if it's a large gathering and you don't know the status of the group, wear a mask, please. And certainly if you're participating in club sports and activities, indoors especially, please wear a mask. This is, that's the biggest risk to you, the biggest risk to our community. We're very fortunate, as I shared before, to have something like 98% of our community vaccinated. You're not going to find that anywhere else. And we know there is a possibility, albeit low, of breakthrough infections and even vaccinated individuals being contagious. And so if we all work together when we're off campus, it will make our on-campus experience all that much safer and successful. And that's what we're gearing towards. Obviously, there's a lot more specifics in that guideline sheet that we sent. And we're really just focused right now on preseason orientation and the first 2 weeks of classes. So prior to the Zoom call, we did receive a number of questions, and so I've compiled them here and just want to answer some of them for you now, and then we'll move to your questions. I see a few questions are coming in the Q&A box, and I'll get to those. Some of them may be duplicates here. So last year we started something called early dorm move-ins for what we considered local boarders, within an hour or two of campus. We are going to do that again this year. It was a little bit easier last year because we didn't have preseason athletics in the dormitories. So tomorrow you'll be receiving, I think it's the last email newsletter for the summer, and that will include the opportunity to sign up for an early dorm move-in. It's for certain dorms on certain days, certain floors that aren't being used by our preseason teams. So if that's something you'd like to do and come move your child into their dorm room a couple weeks early, great. It's a really low pressure situation. You don't have to worry about running from an orientation meeting or, what am I wearing that day and that sort of thing. It does take a little bit of the stress out of the first day of school or first day of arrival. I mentioned before that parents and family members can help with dorm move-in. We're asking that only vaccinated family members enter the dorm and that all family members and students are vaccinated while in the dorm. So please support us in that effort to keep our entire community safe, including our dorm parents and their families who will be active on those days. Do parents of new preseason athletes need to return for the new student orientation? The answer to this is you don't have to. So if you drop your football player off on the 23rd and the new student orientation is 2 weeks later, you don't have to come back. We will have a orientation on each of the arrival days. You're certainly welcome to, but you should know that it will be somewhat redundant if you do come back. But if you'd like to, if you just want to see your child, you can do that. That's up to you. What is a quiet period? Quiet period is what I mentioned before, is sort of this self-enforced distancing during those first 3 days for unvaccinated students coming back. We may use this kind of quiet period within the year after campus leaves, but we're waiting to see how local rates change and how our whole community comes together. So it's not, you're not in your room, it's not an isolation, it's not a quarantine, but we are asking you to just not be in group settings, make sure you're masking whenever you're indoors like everyone else, and do some distancing as well. And if you have more questions about that, Dr. Spencer can give you a little bit of that background on that. I mentioned also the limitations on parent visits to campus. First 2 weeks, we're going to keep it outdoors. We certainly welcome parents to campus, and we're going to reevaluate that after those first 2 weeks. We anticipate that we'll get back to normal and hopefully have indoor visits for vaccinated parents and family members, and then parents weekend and all that. But seems like a long way away, but we'll have to get through this opening of school first. Can students come home for weekends? We anticipate yes. We are not allowing students to go home for weekends on those first couple of weeks. Those are closed weekends. That's a traditional practice for us as we come together as a community. And then we will allow students to go home, again, with the caveat that we ask students to be cautious and families to be cautious. And if you're unvaccinated, that there may be a quiet period when you return to campus and some other limitations. We are allowing students to take a day leave or to walk off campus to shop and dine. Again, there are some restrictions in terms of being masked, Unvaccinated students can only do outdoor dining. And there's some limitations on that anyway at Hill. And you need to waive checkout appropriately and make sure that someone knows where you're going. So all of that will be explained to new students and returning students by the deans when they get back. Roommate and rooming assignments are being posted on the 17th, which I believe is Tuesday. I don't know what time of day that is going to be, but it'll be on my backpack. There may even be an email that goes along with that. So please keep an eye out for that. When will a determination be made about ongoing mitigation guidelines beyond those 2 weeks? Probably pretty close to the end of those 2 weeks. We're going to be watching it carefully. We're going to be monitoring our campus, seeing if any COVID appears on our campus, and to what extent we have close contacts. Certainly, we're going to be looking at local levels, especially for our commuting employees and day students and that sort of thing. But we are very hopeful that after those first 2 weeks, especially as our full immunity levels start to rise and our international students get that first shot and get towards their second shot, that we'll be able to reduce those restrictions as much as possible. That's our goal. And then lastly, can I apply for a masking exemption? The answer to that is no. We are not giving exemptions for allowing students to not wear masks or employees to not wear masks. That's an expectation while that universal indoor masking plan is in place. So those were the questions we got in advance, and I apologize if some of the answers were redundant. I see, Dr. Spencer, before I go to the questions in the Q&A, was there anything that I said that you wanted to add to or maybe correct? Because I'm not always, I don't always get it right.
No, that was spot on. I do want to ask though that for the PCR results, when you upload those results or have a screenshot or a printout, please make sure that the student's name and date of birth are visible on that document. That's really important for adding to the medical record.
Great. Okay. Anything else, Dr. Spencer, before I go to the other questions?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Thank you.
So there are a couple ways to ask questions here. You can put a question in the Q&A box. That's the easiest way. And it's no one else can see your question or your name. So if you want to do that, you can do that. If you put your question in the chat, anyone can see your name, just to be familiar with that. And if you'd like to, and you're brave and you just want to chat a little bit, please feel free to raise your hand and we'll let you talk and we'll hear your voice. But I'll go to our first question here in the chat. When will the preseason athletes learn the dorm they will be staying in, not their permanent dorm? They'll just learn that the day they come. I don't know the answer. I don't think they're going to learn that in advance. The teams live together for that week or two when they're here. And I don't know if it's usually the same dorms each year, but we haven't done preseason in a couple of years, so it may have changed. PCR, this is a question for you, Dr. Spencer. PCR tests can take 3 to 5 days for the results to come back. Is it appropriate to get the testing on Sunday for arrival on Thursday?
It is. The way I count it, if you get a test Sunday, then Monday is day 1, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So you're within the 4-day window for that. That's okay.
Great. And yes, please, do ask if you're not familiar with doing the PCR test. I would encourage you to ask the pharmacy or wherever you're doing it what their turnaround time is when you make the appointment. We're fortunate that in Pottstown, the Pottstown Testing Center is usually a 2-day turnaround time, and they have lots of appointments. But every area is different. And if you live in an area of the country where there are high levels of COVID right now, it may be taking longer. So plan accordingly. Okay, I'll take this question. It's not a medical question, Dr. Spencer. If we have larger items like bedding delivered via Amazon to the school, where will they be available for pickup on move-in day? How long will we have to help our child move in and get settled in their dorm room? So this is sort of like a 3-part question. So first of all, if it gets delivered in time, it will get delivered right to their dorm or to a central location where they can go and pick it up in our mailroom, which is in what we call the laundry building. Maybe in the common room of their dorm, but hopefully it will be delivered right to their dorm room. That will depend a little bit on whether that dorm is being used for preseason athletics. In terms of, but the answer is yes, you can have it delivered by Amazon. We'll get it to them one way or another. How long will you have to move in? If you come, if you schedule an early arrival move in, like I mentioned before, you'll have plenty of time, a couple hours if you need it, I think. On the day of a regularly scheduled thing, I think there's, for most new students, there's about an hour to move in before orientation starts, and then usually about a half an hour after orientation, where you can continue the move-in process. But to the extent possible, we want to limit that. I mean, obviously, we want people indoors as little as possible, but I know it's an important part of the transition, helping your child make their bed and unpack their stuff. But there's going to be a lot of people around helping that day, dorm parents and prefects. So part of that, it's okay to let a child continue to do that unpacking after the fact. All right, Dr. Spencer, if a student tests positive for COVID during the school year, where will they be quarantined?
So if a student tests positive, they need to go into isolation for 10 days. And that would be preferably at home. That's our goal this year. We're not reserving the space to the extent that we did last year to have as much flexibility, hoping and counting on the fact that our high vaccination rate is going to reduce that risk. So any student who tests positive should go home if at all possible and isolate for that 10-day period there. If an unvaccinated student is a close contact of a positive case, they need to quarantine. And again, that would be ideally at home. Our expectation is the student would go home or to a host family guardian if home were quite a remote way away from campus.
Great, thank you. Next question, should third form unvaccinated students assume they should not participate in the weekend's activities scheduled for September 10th, 11th, and September 17th, 18th? I don't think that that's no, I mean, you will be included in those activities. If they're indoors, you'd be required to wear a mask. If they're outdoors, we may, if they're a really tight-knit type of activity, we may ask all students to wear a mask. But for the most part, that's beyond the quiet period. So we will be including our day students and boarding students that are unvaccinated in those events. Dr. Spencer, did I miss anything?
No, I think that's exactly right. We're excited that we're really expecting all of our students to participate in all these activities and really form community from the start.
We're just taking a couple extra precautions as we begin to make sure that everyone's healthy. Are you requiring proof of vaccinations for parents and family members? At this point, we are not. We are building that into our guest, our visitor application, our website, and visitors. I don't even know what you call it, Dr. Spencer. Visitor management system. Thank you. An uploading procedure for that. We're still working on that. It's a little bit tricky, but we are asking our family members to honor the request that they not enter dormitories if they're unvaccinated, or indoor spaces if they're unvaccinated other than restrooms, and to remain masked when they do. So as of right now, that's our plan. Moving forward, we will probably add that to our guest management system, and we'll decide whether we're using that or continuing with our honor policy there. So, what is the status of athletic competition with other schools? Any restrictions? As of right now, we've heard no, we have no restrictions other than the 3-day quiet period for unvaccinated students that we've mentioned before. For indoor sports, we only have one indoor sport in the fall, interscholastic, and that's swimming. We're not requiring masks while we're swimming. They haven't invented one yet, have they? Well, on the deck, yes, but not in the pool.
Right, and so we have water polo in the fall,
Sorry.
And then swimming in the winter, and those will be unmasked, correct?
So I've been speaking to our peer schools, and as of right now, there are no restrictions on vaccinated or unvaccinated students or members of the team. Obviously, if there's an outbreak at a school and it involves a team, We'll have to be talking about that kind of thing. But as of right now, we don't anticipate any changes, especially to outdoor sports in the fall. There may be some restrictions on students who are training for indoor sports in the fall, like squash or wrestling or something like that. That we are going to work on masking and that sort of thing. But in terms of interscholastic competition, there are no restrictions as of this point. For students coming to preseason, do we bring all of their belongings when they come for preseason, or do we have to bring their belongings on regular move-in day? Also, the COVID test will be 2 to 4 days prior to coming to the school for preseason or prior to move-in day. I'm going to take that last question first. So whatever day you're coming to campus, assigned to come to campus, that's when the PCR test should be tied to. So if you're coming for preseason, do your COVID test for preseason. If you're coming for regular new student day or returning student day, tie your PCR test to your assigned arrival date, whichever is earliest. In terms of your belongings, you certainly can bring all of your belongings if you're coming to preseason. But if a parent would like to come back later for the normal new student day and bring the rest of the belongings that they might need for their room, you can. So basically, most students will stay in a room that is different from their long-term room. So if you have a lot of stuff and you're bringing fans and other things, you may not want to bring that all on the first day and bring it back a few days later or a week or two later. Will theater productions be held indoors in the CFTA with a live audience this year? As of right now, the answer to that is yes. We are during the theater boot camp. I think they're working on some indoor and outdoor things, and they will be masked if they're indoors, since it's part of our first 2 weeks. But beyond that, again, because of our high level of vaccination and what we hope will be a declining level of local COVID cases, we are anticipating live indoor theater with audience participation. Dr. Spencer, did I get that one right?
In speaking with Mr. McGriff, I do think he's looking at shifting the theater boot camp performance outdoors, just as we're still new in this gathering phase. But absolutely, we are planning for some on stage with live audience later.
And it's a good slate of productions this year. Exciting. For theater boot camp attendees, are they fully moving in on 9/2, or is the full move in still 9/5? It's sort of like preseason. You can fully move. They're not moving into their. Actually, I don't know the answer to that. Dr. Spencer, are they moving into their regular dorm?
I do not know the answer to that. I think it's going to depend in large part on, is there another team already in that space? But I think by that point we may be moving to regular spaces.
I'll follow up on that question, but I'm pretty sure we are moving. We will have moved to our regular spaces, so they can fully move in on 9/2, but they can also, a parent could come back on 9/5 and do the move in with them then as well. Will the students and faculty with enduring vaccination exemptions be required to wear a mask ongoing beyond September 19th? Thank you. The answer to that is possibly. It's a wait and see. There's a good chance that they will. But it depends on how our community is, responding to all of this and how the local rates are going. Dr. Spencer, anything you want to add to that?
I don't know. I don't think so. That's right. This is going to be a wait and see. We're going to see how our campus health holds as people come from all over the world and the country, and how these initial tests play out is really going to inform how we can approach the next phase.
Great. Do vaccinated parents moving students in need a pre-arrival or arrival COVID test? The answer to that is no. We assume it's going to be a relatively brief interaction, and you'll be wearing a mask. So please, you don't need to go to that trouble. If you want to, for your own sake, we won't stop you, but we won't be collecting that kind of information. Is the dress code for orientation days academic dress? No. You'll get an email about that. It's usually academic casual or casual, depending. For third formers, that 3-day period will probably be pretty casual. For our normal orientation day, we usually say academic casual, so shorts and a collared shirt if it'll be warm. There's always 1 or 2 students who show up in a coat and tie for orientation. Please don't be one of them because it's really uncomfortable. Usually given the heat, and it will be outdoors a lot. When do the preseason athletes move into their permanent room, and/or can we move them into their permanent room on preseason drop-off day? So they move into their permanent rooms about a week, for football players about 10 days in, and for other preseason athletes it's about a week in. And so you could come back if you wanted to and help them with that move in, but they'll just do their own move in. At that point, there'll be a lot of people to help them with that. So there's your answer. There are 1 or 2 lucky kids every year that happen to be their preseason dorm happens to be their long-term dorm, and they get assigned their long-term room, but it's pretty rare. Just luck of the draw. For theater boot attendees, should we use the PCR math minus 3 days to sync up with 9-2 rather than 9-5? Yes, please. Again, whatever is your first day on campus, tie your PCR test to your first day, your first arrival day. Can you speak about the form retreats a bit? Will day students be on campus overnight during that weekend? I don't have a great answer to that right now. I think those are a little bit in flux. So we'll just have to wait and see how those are shape up. Sorry. My daughter is a 4th former. Has the athletic requirement been reinstated for her this year? Don't know the answer to that question. I'll have to, you can send an email to Mr. Alberg and he can answer the question. I have lost track of the athletic requirement, sorry. What do we do with the full-time dorm items during preseason camp? So they will just be stored in a corner of your preseason room, and then you'll move them over to your room, your full-time room later on. Or again, you can come back. Thank you. Amazon delivery helps with moving in twins. Great, you're welcome. I think it has been answered, but wanted to clarify for the sake of test scheduling. A new 5th form student scheduled to arrive on Sunday, September 5th. Can the PCR test be conducted on Wednesday, September 1st? Dr. Spencer, the answer I think to that is yes.
Yes, correct. And that's a good model for everybody to just think through. If you're getting a test on the 1st, then we count 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th. So 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th. So that arrival date, the 1st, it fits in that window for the 5th arrival. And then you can just use that math wherever you happen to fall in the arrival.
Do our preseason athletes come home at the end of preseason if they are boarding students, or do they stay on campus until the start of school? I'm not 100% sure that question. Generally speaking, if they're boarding students, they stay on campus through the start of school. If they're day students, they go home. I think that's the answer. We used to allow boarding students to go home for a day during that switchover period, but I don't think we're allowing that this year. Do you know if I'm wrong about that, Dr. Spencer?
I don't, and I certainly would prefer they stayed.
We usually ask them to stay and help with the orientation period with new students, especially for returning students. Okay, will vaccinated students be rooming with unvaccinated students? So it's a bit of a mixed answer. The answer is yes in some circumstances. So we have not changed roommates for any returning students. Returning students who have requested a roommate, we have not made any changes to those requests. For some of our unvaccinated new students, they will be rooming with other unvaccinated students. There are a few students who have a temporary situation, like the grace period that I mentioned before for international students, who will basically begin the vaccination process on the first day of school. Those students may be rooming with other new vaccinated students. Did I get that right, Dr. Spencer?
Correct.
Okay. packing list says cloth masks. Can students wear disposable masks? Yep. Students can bring cloth masks. They can bring surgical disposable masks. They can bring KN95s. They can bring N95. It's a little uncomfortable for the kind of use that they're going to be using it for. I would say most of our students, at least last year, wore cloth masks or surgical masks, disposable surgical masks. Really up to you.
We do ask that you stay away from the gaiters, though.
Yep. Gaiters and vented masks,
Mhm.
right? Some masks have a little circular vents. Those aren't ideal for us. So no gaiters and no vented masks. Would a new fourth form boy be roommates with a new fourth form boy or returning? Almost always new students are boarding with other new students. On occasion, a new student will have a returning student as a roommate. And I think that is the case again this year. When should we expect to receive our email letting us know what time our family should report to third form orientation on 9/3? I think that's going to be sometime later this week. It's not coming out in tomorrow's newsletter. I think they're still finalizing that. But I would imagine by the end of this week, you'll get an email with sort of your arrival sequence. If it doesn't come this week, it will be the following week, but it'll certainly give you plenty of time to plan for an arrival. What will a third form day student schedule look like during the first 2 closed weekends, times they are expected to be on campus? So those first 2 weekends are closed, which means we're going to have a lot of community activities on campus. There's no restrictions on day students coming to campus on the weekends like there were last year. So, there will be expected events that we want all students to be at. But I don't have that schedule in front of me. I apologize. Who is the best person or department to ask dorm-specific questions? Example, storage bin sizes or night tables. It's really not anyone. I mean, you can email Amy Winter in Community Life, awinter@thehill.org, and she can give you some more information. But we generally, we don't give out specific information about like an individual room, or we don't have floor plans for all the dorms. Sometimes colleges do that, but we don't. So. Okay, I have one other question in the chat, Dr. Spencer. Thanks for doing this presentation. Welcome. Can we go back to the isolation period again? If your student is vaccinated and they have a close contact that ends up being positive, do they need to go home? Or they only go home if they have a positive test? And what triggers a test? Presumably students will have their daily health check-in. Will symptoms trigger a test? And there's no Zoom class, right? So if they're sent home, they miss class. There was a lot of questions. You want to just sort of do the overall approach to how we're going to do contact tracing and testing?
Sure. So for unvaccinated students, we likely will have some ongoing periodic surveillance testing. That means testing asymptomatic students to see if anybody's infected. Now that would then trigger, if it were positive and you had a vaccinated student who was a close contact, the current public health guidance is that a vaccinated student does not need to quarantine. They do, however, need to mask for 14 days or until a negative test result. They need to test within 2 to 5 days. And they need to monitor for symptoms for the full 14 days. So we're going to do a lot of monitoring this year, I imagine, at least some. And we're going to really call upon the students to be very diligently paying attention to have they developed any symptoms. We'll do that testing, we'll do that masking, but those vaccinated students will not have to quarantine as of today's guidance. Now that's an important part. That's really what allows us to run a boarding school in a pandemic, of keeping those kids in the classroom, keeping them on campus, watching, looking for an outbreak or transmission, but really holding some faith in the fact that the vaccine is likely to protect them against the possibility of transmission. There are going to be some breakthroughs perhaps, but not all that often is our hope and our expectation. So across our entire population, anybody with symptoms does need to be tested. So Delta variant being so predominant in this country right now, certainly in many parts of the country, and even locally, it's predominant. So that has been shown to really present with milder symptoms than the first phases of this pandemic. So even runny nose, congestion, things that look like common cold or allergies, that could be COVID. And while that may not be a big deal for that individual student who won't get very sick, it could be a big deal for an unvaccinated classmate or teammate. So that's where we really do need to do a lot of symptomatic testing. Anybody with symptoms is going to get tested. And then if it's an unvaccinated student who's a close contact to a positive case, that student has to go home to quarantine. And I think I might have missed one of the sub questions in there.
I'll add one thing. I think it's still true, Dr. Spencer. If a student has had COVID within a certain period of time, it was 3 months before?
Correct, 90 days, it still is.
That in addition to being vaccinated, or then they also would not have to quarantine after a close contact.
Correct.
There was another question, which was, will all students be doing symptom test check-ins every day? For right now, we are requiring our unvaccinated students to do daily symptom checking. And we're certainly going to ask our vaccinated students to be aware of symptoms, but they won't have to fill out the app each day.
And I want to go back to this 90-day grace period. Within 90 days of having an infection and recovering from that, if your student is within 90 days of a positive test, they do not need that pre-arrival PCR, but we do need to have that positive test result so we can, first of all, see where they are on that and then kind of map them out of when they might be retested.
So bottom line, if you've had COVID if your child has had COVID in the last 90 days, please make sure you're communicating that to our wellness team, and they will help navigate that on a one-off basis with you. There was one other question, which is there's no Zoom class. So we are not offering remote classes at this point. If there was a significant outbreak for a large number of students, which we certainly don't expect and are working hard to prevent, we do still have the technology that we could do that, and we might make that available if needed in a pinch. But if it's just 1 or 2 students, it'll be like other circumstances when they were ill in previous years, and we'll work together with them in the academic office to get them caught up. But we're really trying to avoid the limitations and the disruption of doing hybrid or high flex classes. If a student has had the first shot and comes back for preseason, will the student still have a quiet period? Dr. Spencer, so if they're in between shots, it's still a quiet period, correct?
Yes, I would recommend that quiet period if they're not fully vaccinated, which really is 2 weeks following the final shot.
Thank you. Have details been released on signing up for laundry service? I saw that question coming and I texted Mr. Genikis. He must be enjoying his Sunday afternoon because he hasn't gotten back to me yet. I'm not sure if it has or hasn't, but if you haven't seen it, you can certainly still sign up for laundry. We usually allow that right up until the beginning of school. So you can always email Community Life. Mrs. Winter can help you with that, awinter@thehill.org. She's a great resource for all these kind of questions around dormitories and laundry service. So if you haven't written down Mrs. Winter's email address, I feel bad. She's going to have like 20 emails in her email box tomorrow morning, Dr. Spencer. Okay. What happens if an arriving vaccinated student tests positive when they arrive on campus for move-in and orientation? Where do they quarantine? If traveling from far away, California in this case, and going back home is difficult logistically, is it the parent's responsibility to find a place to complete the quarantine, or is it done somewhere on campus? So there's a couple of assumptions built into that question. Presumably they passed the PCR test. They had a negative PCR test, but when they arrived, they had a positive antigen test. So first of all, we will verify that test upon arrival to make sure that it was not a false positive, which happens from time to time. We have the technology that we can do that. If it is a verified positive test and they live far away, if the family has someone nearby, we would certainly welcome the opportunity for them to go. It will be more comfortable if they go and stay with a family member, a host, or a guardian. Unvaccinated students who live far away, must provide a host family within driving distance for that kind of circumstance. For a vaccinated student who tests positive on arrival and does not have a host family nearby or somewhere they can stay or isn't with their parents, we do have a very limited number of spaces on campus for that. They're not super comfortable. They're pretty bare bones spaces, but we've used them before and we'll use them again. So we'll work with you closely. We certainly aren't going to put a child back on an airplane to California. And we imagine that it'll be a very, very small number of students that this happens to, hopefully none. But if it's one or two, rest assured, we are not turning them out. We will take good care of all of our students. We're prepared for that. I'm not answering the questions fast enough, Dr. Spencer, because every time I get to the last question, a couple more pop up, but I'm going to try to answer a couple more in our hour. If my child tests positive, how do I get them home? I take it I'd have to drive 13 hours to pick up. Don't think they should be flying. So I think we just covered the original testing period, but I think you're asking for later in the school year if they were to test positive. So for students that are within driving distance, and we've defined driving distance last year up to, I think, 500 miles away, we do ask families to come and pick up their child for them to quarantine at home. It's just more comfortable, and it's, you know, to have your family around to take care of you. Even though we do a great job and our wellness center does a great job, you know, there's nothing better than being home when you're ill, and certainly better than being in a cot in the wellness center or in our quarantine area. But if it's a great distance, we certainly won't put them on a plane, and we do have spaces available on campus. Did I miss anything there, Doc?
No, though I would not use the word cot with the wellness center. I mean, we have beds that are set up as dorm rooms. So I want parents to know that they are comfortable and they're well cared for.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I exaggerated there. Okay. I did just get a text response from Mr. Genikis on the laundry question. So I guess he wasn't napping on this Sunday afternoon. The information is in the handbook, student handbook. The information, you can sign up and send an email, sign up, but Mrs. Winter is always a good answer there. When will students know their dorm assignment? We have one student who is assigned and one who is still waiting. The dorm assignments come out on Tuesday. And that may be that one student knows their dorm assignment because they're a prefect, but non-prefect students will find out their dorm assignments and roommates on Tuesday. That's for returning and new students. I made it to the end of the questions. Does anyone want to raise their hand and chat with Dr. Spencer? It's like one of those call-in shows. You can talk with Dr. Spencer. Well, thank you for joining us on this Sunday afternoon. We did record this session, and a link to the session will go out in the newsletter tomorrow. Roommate assignments come out on Tuesday. If anything changes on our opening of school guidelines, we'll be in touch. We're hopeful that things will continue to improve, and that we'll be able to reduce our restrictions as quickly as possible. I'm really grateful for everyone's patience. We were hoping to start the year fully normally. That wasn't in the cards, unfortunately, but we think that we're in a great position to have another successful school year. We're looking forward to having everyone back on campus. We're planning for a terrific beginning to the school year, and the whole year is shaping up quite nicely. So thank you for making time on Sunday afternoon. Dr. Spencer, thanks for all your wisdom as always, and for making sure I didn't miss any of the details. And we'll look forward to seeing everyone in just a week or two. Have a great day, everybody.